Hi guys, it's Sam with Spieler Custom Baits. Today we're going to be making one of our Marabou jigs. I'm going to be starting off with this 2-aught gamakatsu hook, double collared jig head. Go ahead and start by getting a little bit of thread on there and cutting our tag in. I powder coated these with a black with a little bit of a red flake in there. And we're going to be doing this Marabou jig in black. When doing Marabou jigs, I like to make sure that all of the feathers have a certain type of plumage to them. So I want them to be full and have really nice strands to them. So while going through, what I'll do is, as you can see, I'll take off the tip, and then what I'll do is I'll take off the back bad parts of the feather. There's certain ones that just won't be good due to packaging, natural reasons, or just because they didn't get dyed properly. And then what I'll do is I'll grab the stem of the feather and I'll cut off the plumage. And when taking these, I want a big chunk of it underneath that thread. And then after a couple of wraps, I'll kind of wiggle it with my fingers just to make sure that it spreads out, and it helps the thread to really grip down on that Marabou. And what I'm going to keep doing is I'm going to keep grabbing pieces of Marabou and repeating this process, following around that jig collar. I really enjoy the collars off this mold for Marabou jigs just because it has that double collar. When you start building up towards the back, it gives it something really to grip onto, and then it helps keep that thread from getting a whole bunch of slippage while you're using it. I like to leave a decent amount of that Marabou out and really thread tie that in. I find that it helps keep any slippage from the actual Marabou through the thread during use. And right here we're just going to keep repeating this process until we reach up to the actual head of the jig. And you want to be kind of picky when picking out your Marabou. Certain dyers and manufacturers have different quality of feathers that you can buy. Some of them have really pronounced dye marks where the feathers have been tied in together, and you want to watch out for those when you're picking the pieces that you want to put into your jigs, because they'll come out with dye spots on them. These Marabou jigs are really good for smallmouth fishing, especially since with this one I'm using a 1/2 ounce jig head, so it allows it to get to depth for those later in the season smallmouth. And if you notice, I like to leave a lot of that front end loose there, because I find that as you tie it in, you'll end up cleaning that up, but it'll help tie in and keep that plumage really tucked in there. When making your Marabou jigs, you want to make sure that you get coverage all the way around the hook shank. And by pinching it down on those collars after the first couple tie-ins, it really helps spread that out to make sure that you ensure that coverage. Just cleaning up a little bit here. With this series of jigs, I'm going for a really full look. So I'll probably end up using 8 to 12 feathers altogether. Because I'm looking for a fairly large profile. What we're doing here is I'm just selecting feathers, making sure that the feathers that I'm getting are the ones that I want and that they have the correct plumage. Now I'm just building up that thread area just so that I don't have slippage. And I'll make sure that in this video that I list all of my pieces and parts and what I'm using in the description, materials wise. And as we get towards the tip of the jig head, we're going to make sure even more that we have that coverage all the way around the jig to give it an even look all the way around the front side for the front profile. Doing these types of jigs is probably the messiest jig making that I do. The plumage, especially when you're cutting and making sure that the pieces are tied in, you end up getting a lot of pieces of the feathers all around your workspace, and they have a tendency to float. What I'm doing right here is by pulling back those feathers, I'm just ensuring that it stays out of those thread ties. To get a clean thread look, you need to have those plumes pulled all the way back, and the tension on the thread will actually continuously push those filaments backwards to try to make them look like your classic Marabou jig. Gonna get a couple more pieces of Marabou. Right here I'm just checking to make sure that I have a full coverage around the plume and checking the tension on those. And then to check for coverage, I always blow on the back end because you can see if you've missed a spot or if there's areas that are not as covered as others. And then once I have the plumage that I want, I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. And then we're going to add our Chrystal flash. For this one, I'm just going to go ahead and add 4 strands to each side. What it does is it, on that profile, it gives it just a little bit of attention grabbing. So while it's traveling through the water, it'll refract some light to hopefully grab the fish's attention so that they look over and see that profile. It just gives it that little bit of an extra look at me type of deal. And I'm just using a clear crystal flash for these. And what I do is I go ahead and I try to get a couple of wraps around them. And then what I do is I slide them so that they are at the length that I want before I double them back. And then once doubled back, I go ahead and tie those down on the side that I want them to be. And then with this particular jig, I'm going to repeat that process on the other side as well, because I want that attention grabbing on the profile, that side profile. As you can also tell, working with Marabou, a lot of times your hands will get dyed pretty regularly, just because the dyes on those types of plumages are fairly loose on there. So you obviously want to make sure that you wash your hands after you're finished making your jigs. We're going to go ahead and finish this up with whip finishes. On my Marabou jigs, just because there's so much plumage and there's so much thread, I like to really lock those down. Go ahead and clip that thread off. And then I always make sure that I put a hard head, some sort of coating on my threading to prevent the slippage. I'm using Loon hardhead here. You want to make sure that you have a good even coat all the way around, and it just helps tie that in. Usually what I also do is after they've dried, about 2 to 3 days later, I go ahead and I recoat those again just to make sure that anything that's soaked in, that is covered. And we're going to go ahead and clip our flash. And we have our finished jig. Let's go ahead and get some shots of those real fast. And as you can see, our crystal flash gives it a really nice profile on this jig, making it really great for mid-water applications. And this was Sam with Spieler Custom Baits. Thank you guys for watching.